All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Bootstrapped Solo. I am your host, Pratik Shah, and today we're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly about running your own practice. This podcast is for those who want to know what it's really like to start, run, and grow a practice. Today's guest is my good friend, Kris Mukherji. He runs a solo practice called the Law Office of Kris Mukherji out of San Diego. His practice is focused on business litigation, estate planning, and personal injury. He started his practice back in 2012 and has been growing ever since. Kris, welcome to the show. Thank you for being on.
Thanks for having me, man. Thank you.
No, man, you and I have known each other for a long time. We went to law school together. We did mock trial together. And, I've seen you build your firm up and build a lifestyle business for yourself over the last 10 years. That's been really impressive. And I know you're familiar with the show, so I want to get started right away. We graduated in 2012, passed the bar, and you started your practice in the same year.
So we graduated May 2012.
Yeah.
We took the bar in July. We got the results November 16th. My wedding was November 17th. I got my bar results at wedding rehearsal dinner. Obviously, I passed. I was happy about that. I got sworn in December of that year in a private ceremony, and I started my firm right after that.
That's awesome.
So December of 2012 is when I started my practice, or started taking care of the documentation to get my practice started. And then once that was done, by January of 2013, I was up and running.
That's awesome. So when you got your bar results, did you already know before the bar results came in that you wanted to start your own, or was this out of a necessity? How did you make that decision?
Oh, no. I knew this going into law school. Actually, my personal statement going into law school was actually about starting a practice in estate planning and business, because I'd already been working in the business arena way before even I went into law school. I went to law school when I was 28 years of age, so I've been working in the field for a while. So my personal statement going to law school was about estate planning and business, and so when I came out, the goal was to start my own practice, and I never looked back.
That's awesome. So you knew ahead of time what you were going to do. So you were never like applying for jobs or trying to find something or anything like that. You just knew right away, this is what I'm going to do.
I will say this. I did get, I clerked the DA's office. I really enjoyed it. And I think that's where kind of my love for litigation kind of came in, just being around that. And I did mock trial, obviously, in high school and in parts of college, and even in law school as well. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. But having my own practice was always the goal. It was the goal when I went into law school, and that was the goal I came out with as well.
All right, so let's talk a little bit kind of about money, right? Because that's always important. At the end of the day, if you're running a business, you gotta be profitable. And a lot of times to start a business, you got to have a budget or something. Did you save up money?
Right.
I mean, I know you went to law school at night, and I think you worked during the day, right?
I did. So I went, for me, law school was 4 years. I worked in law school part-time. I was working full-time during the day. I was interning, and then going to school at night. And that kind of changed a little bit when I got into the mock trial team. I still maintained a part-time schedule. I was still working. I was still going to school, and I was on the mock trial team as well. And I was interning. So I had a full schedule. And I tell people that packed schedule actually helped me when it came time for the bar. We can talk about that later. But as far as like money saved up, there wasn't enough for that, right? I mean, you're spending pretty much everything on what you were doing back then.
Right, and living in Southern California.
Living in Southern California, I remember my wife and I lived in a one-bedroom apartment. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and I would, wake up every day, and I would put my suit on, and I would go sit at my dining table, and I would open the phone book, and I would cold call CPAs, financial planners, and realtors, and I'll say, hey, look, I'm an attorney. I would like to take you out a happy hour, coffee, lunch, or dinner, and kind of talk to you about my business.
I want to get into that. Let me stop you there, because before we get there, sure, what I want to kind of go in a little timeline a little bit, because I love that story. You've told me that before, and that's why I wanted you on, because I really want to get into that hustle. But before we get there, the reason I asked the money question is when you made this decision to start your firm, or you passed the bar, you're like, hey, I'm ready to go. Let's do the paperwork. Did you have a budget for your business, or did you have like, I've got, $25,000 saved up and that's going to last me 6 months? How does that work?
I had some money saved up, obviously. Right. And I will tell you this, I was, so I think since I was 18 years old, I've been working as a strength and conditioning coach and a personal trainer. And I'd done that for 17 years. And I did that my first couple of years as an attorney. So I was still doing that. I was still working as a strength and conditioning coach, a trainer, while still being a lawyer. So that was kind of like my income coming in a little bit there, as to pay the rent, and pay my car insurance, etc. But as far as a large sum of money saved up,
Got
now
it.
I tell people this all the time. My first year out of law school, I think I made like
Yeah.
$23,000. Right? I'm,
Yeah.
I'm serious, like
Yeah.
$23,000, and half of it or more of it was spent on going to happy hours and coffees and lunches and dinners just to kind of meet people and network with
Yeah.
people. But I understood that. I understood that what I was doing, and I remember having a conversation with my wife when I came out of law school, and it was about, hey, look, I can go and apply for a firm if I have to, or I can struggle early on to kind of build my practice up, and then a couple of years from now, we won't even have to look back at it.
Right.
And that was the goal. And I remember going through those early struggles and questioning myself, but at the same time, kind of sticking down the path. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. So now you had this conversation with your wife at the time. You had just gotten married, and you say, she thinks she's marrying a lawyer who's going to go work big law and make a bunch of money. And you tell her, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make $23,000. And
Right.
what was her response? What was her response when you told her that? Hey, these are
Very
the
supportive,
choices.
right? I mean, very supportive. I mean, my wife has been supportive all through law school. She was supportive when I was studying for the bar, and while she was planning the wedding. So she was very supportive through the whole process, and and she agreed with it. She's like, look, we can have the freedom later on if you go through the struggles early on, and we kind of did
Yeah.
that, right? And I'm enjoying the benefit, the rewards of those early struggles
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. And so let's get into a little bit of these early struggles. I love hearing these stories because I think it really helps people know not only that it's not easy, but what it takes and what kind of not just a financial commitment, but time commitment and mental commitment it takes to really kind of get to the point that you've gotten to. So, you start to practice and you mentioned that you would get up in your own office or in your own home, put on a full suit, go down to the dinner table because you wanted to have that is it because you wanted to have that mental switch of, hey, even if I'm in my house,
Right.
I'm at work.
If you're in your pajamas, you're never going to get in that mindset. It's just not going to happen, right? And so you have to have an area that you call your office area. So there wasn't any going downstairs, going upstairs. Like I say, we lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. I'd come out of my bedroom, there'd be the dining table there, and I'd kind of made that into my office. And I would put on my suit, and I would sit in front of my computer, and I would go on Google or open the phone book, and I would see who I could call that day to
Yeah.
network, right? And that's essentially what I would do. And my goal was to set up networking meetings with CPAs and financial planners and realtors, because those are great referral sources for people who are in business and estate planning. And that's what I would do. And I remember people being shocked that they were getting a cold call from a lawyer to take them out of happy hour, coffee, lunch, and dinner. But I understood the value of
Mhm.
that, right? I understood the value of building those relationships, and I saw those paying off the second year and third year onwards.
So when you would sit down on day one and you open up your computer and you say, okay, local CPAs or local realtors or whoever, and you start calling, in a typical day, how many calls would you say you make?
I would have a goal. I want to try to make at least 20, 30 calls, right? Like valid calls. Like I want to go on LinkedIn and I would type in like, CPA La Jolla, high estate, CPAs or other attorneys. I reached out to a lot of attorneys, and and what I love about San Diego was I would say that 95% of them were very, very open to have conversations with me, and a lot of them kind of shaped the way my practice went. With the advice they gave me, and they were very open with it. They never looked at me as competition. They always looked at me as a colleague that they wanted to help grow. And a lot of those relationships I still have till today. And at that networking event that I had at the Padres a couple of years ago, where you were there, a lot of those attorneys were there, that helped me get started. And I'm very, very thankful for that.
Yeah. So you make these, let's say you make, when you say 20 to 30 valid calls, what do you mean by a valid call?
It's you can make what I call junk calls, and you just type in a CPA and just randomly call those people. So what I would do is I would try to hone my search a little bit more, right, in the area that I was working at. So I always wanted my practice to be in the UTC La Jolla area. That's where I have it right now. So I would kind of, you know, try to get my calls in either Carlsbad, La Jolla, Del Mar, Encinitas, Solana Beach, Claremont, PB, that kind of area. And then I would go a little bit further north, a little bit further east if I had to. And eventually I had to start kind of broadening it more because I was kind of getting enough at that point. And I would say, high state, high value estate planners, or I would type in like, big firm CPAs or small firm CPAs or solo CPAs, and just anybody that I could reach out to, realtors, realtors Solana Beach, realtors La Jolla, realtors Del Mar. And there's a million realtors out there. There's probably more realtors than attorneys out there. So I'd be able to call anybody at that point. And then I'd kind of find out, when you look up a realtor, you want to see the realtors that survived 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, right? That downturn. So it was always great to see a realtor who started before that and survived it and was now in 2013. So those are the realtors that I wanted to connect with because I wanted to see what helped them survive their business. And those are the ones that are still around today, right? They're the ones that are doing great today. So versus the ones that just kind of started off as a part-time job and didn't make it. And I wanted to reach out to other attorneys that had thriving, solo practices or small firm practices and see what they did when they came out. She's still practicing, obviously, and her name is Danielle Barger. And she was actually a professor at TJSL when we were there. And she was fantastic to me. She actually allowed me to use her office space for a good amount of time. She helped me get some clients. So she was instrumental when I first started my practice out, and she was very helpful. And I'm always going to be thankful to her for that. Pablo Palomino, another estate planning attorney. He's still a good friend of mine, still a person I call on a regular basis. Walt Pennington for business law. I still call him on a regular basis for any questions that I have. And he's never said no to me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you're sitting at the dining table. I want to dig into this because I love this because I think a lot of people, they start their practice and you started with 0 clients, right?
0 clients.
It's not like you had some clients that were waiting in the wing and you're like, hold on, let me get my license. And then here's a retainer. Now I got 5 clients when I start. The day you open your laptop clients. With your practice, 0 clients.
Look, and I, not to discount, what we do as personal injury lawyers, but personal injury is a little bit different, right? Because you're doing a case on contingency. So you're saying, hey, look, you're not paying me anything. The insurance company is. Well, back then I wasn't doing PI. It was purely estate planning and business, which requires people to come out of pocket. That was a little different ballgame, right? To get people to trust you to pay for your services was a big thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're asking them to cut a couple $1,000 check and hand it to you when, they may be your first client. So you start calling. Day 1, you're calling and then day 2, you're calling. Day 3, you're calling. And you continue to call and you continue to have these meetings and you're setting up happy hours. Out of the 20 or 30 valid calls, how many times would you get actually a meeting set up, would you say, on average?
I came from, a sales environment. And so I was pretty persuasive. And I think I came off as a genuine person. So, 20, 30 valid calls that probably get maybe half the amount of people actually engaged and maybe have set meetings with another half of those, right? So it was a pretty good time. Right. I would say so.
So 10 to 15 would engage with you.
Right.
And then maybe about 5 to 7, you'd actually set up a in-person.
Right. Because remember, if you're leaving messages, chances are they're not going to call you back, right? So you want to kind of get the person on the phone, right? And you get them on the phone, you introduce yourself, you say, hey, look, I'm a new lawyer. I'm not looking for a job, but I'm looking for just to meet with you and just pick your brain. Right. And people like that. Right. And so let me take you out happy hour, coffee, lunch, or dinner, or whatever. And they would engage. And usually what I found was, established attorneys are able to kind of gauge your character and gauge, okay, if this person's truly committed, is successful, wants to be successful, is hardworking or not. And they would start referring me cases. They would start referring me cases that they were like, hey, look, Kris, this is kind of not something that, I want to take on. It's a lower fee structure. Would you be interested? Yeah, absolutely. And I would do a great job with it and, and send them a thank you card, send them, whatever. They would never ask for a referral fee, but I'd be more than happy to do that. That's how it started. Right. And once you start doing good work and people see that and they realize that you are credible, they'll refer you more cases. Right.
Yeah.
And that same thing happened with the listserv. I would go in the listserv and I would constantly pick people's brain on it all the time. And I remember attorneys asking me, Kris, how are you getting all these cases? I'm like, just talking to people, just going out and,
and literally it's just asking for them. A lot of people are like, how are you getting all these clients? I'm like, I'm literally just asking people to send me clients. Right. And they're like, oh yeah, I haven't done that. They're afraid to ask.
I think what happens a lot of times is, people come out of law school with a sense of entitlement sometimes, where they feel that, hey, I'm a lawyer now, so I have to have a certain standard. The problem with that is you haven't established yourself yet, right? So for me, it was I will do whatever, I will go wherever, to build that reputation. So if I had to go to Orange County to meet with the client, I would do that. If I had to go to LA to meet with the client, I would do that. If I had to, take a call at 3 a.m. because the client's, out of the country, I would do that. Right. And that was just my mentality growing up. When I was a trainer, I would do the same thing as well. So I knew what I had to do. Right. I knew what I had to do to kind of establish myself. I had a growing family. So I was committed and I was vested in it. So.
Yeah. So you have these 7 to 15 conversations, or excuse me, you'd have about 10 to 15 conversations, about 5 to 7 meetings set.
Right.
And as you're setting these, you're probably setting the meeting out a few days. It's not like, oh, next day, let's meet, right? Like it's whenever they're available.
It would be whenever they're available.
Yeah.
Whenever you're
available. So that may not be the next day. That may be, 3 days from now. They may be going on vacation. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Okay, let's meet then. So you continue to make these calls. You continue to have these conversations, continue to set these meetings. Do you remember, or can you estimate from your day one of sitting at your dinner table and making these calls to your day one of signing your first client, how long did that take?
It was within the first month. It was definitely within the first
That's
month.
Awesome.
Yeah. And it was a referral, right? It wasn't like,
right.
It wasn't a referral from a CPA. It was a referral from another attorney. I just remember that. But I also remember, you learn a lot from these referrals you get. And so I remember there was a client that I got that I looked at it as a very good learning experience. And it, got the results that I felt like that was best for them. But it was mainly referrals early on from other attorneys for cases they did not want to take.
Yeah, of course. And I think that's how I started. And I think that's just a common way to start. But two things I want to touch on with the fact that it was within the first month is that it's both quick and it's both long, because it's quick now when you look at it, you go, hey, it took a couple of weeks or whatever. Within the first month, I signed a client. But it's long when every day you're sitting at the dinner table and you're making the calls and there's no cases, and a week passes and there's no cases, and you've spent money on events. And I know you had the mindset where you're like, I know this is an investment and I know this will pay off. But for a lot of folks that maybe want to give this a shot, like, understand that it does take time. Don't think you're going to make calls for one day, have one set of meetings, and it's going to turn into business.
Agreed.
100%. That's the important thing I want to talk about.
Look, I would say even it took, yes, I got a case my first month, and I got cases every month or so. And it kind of built up from there, no question about it. But all those relationships that I established in that first year, 2013, I didn't see that pay off till 2014, right? Mm-hmm. That people need to realize that, because those relationships that I established in 2014 is when those CPAs and realtors started referring me those clients and connecting me people, throwing me a bone and seeing how I did, and did great. So they wanted to send me more. So it took a while, but I understood that. I knew that was the game. I knew that you have to kind of go through that process to do that. If you're coming out of law school, I need you to understand that, right? If you don't get something the first day, the second day, the first month, don't be discouraged. It takes time. The economy makes a big difference too, because remember, the economy that we came out of from law school was not a great economy. It was building up at that point. So it's a struggle, but it's a good struggle. It pays off in the end, and you'll be better for that.
Do you remember, and if so, are you willing to share how much you generated from that first client?
I want to say it was probably around 1,500. And
perfect.
And that was, I remember, because I met with another attorney. His name is Siddharth Chokar. He's a fantastic attorney in San Diego, and another person who was very helpful to me early on when I was starting my practice. And I remember he told me, he's like, Kris, you're charging too little, right? He's like, you're doing good work, you're doing good product, you got to charge more for that. And I was like, oh no, I can't. And he helped me actually get my price up, and that actually helped me build my business and build my credibility. So I'm very thankful to him for that.
That's awesome. But that's the reason I bring up that, and the reason I want to talk about that is when you look at 1,500, there are people that can look at that two ways. One way to look at that is you did all that work of all those calls and all those meetings, you got $1,500. But the other way to look at that is, hey, that's a breadcrumb that's leading to more. That's 100%. Leading to the next one. That's leading to the next one.
100%, right? That one client was a referral source and is still a client till today. That client is still a client till today, right? That estate plan that
That's
I did
amazing.
back then.
10 years
All
later.
my 10 years later, all my estate planning clients, I would say that those estate plans that I created 10 years ago, I've probably, restated those trusts, at least once, right? They've had,
Yeah.
kids and grandkids or whatever else. So those relationships you build last, right? When you start estate planning a business client, it's a long-term relationship. It's not a one and done thing, right? So that's the way I look at it. And that's the way I look at it every client that I get.
Yeah. So, all right. So we figured out now how you started moving, how you started getting clients, really focused on relationship building within the community, not just with lawyers, but other business professionals. And you start growing that way, getting referrals from your clients. And as you're starting to build your practice and your clients are coming in, obviously we said at the top of the show that you're a solo attorney, no employees. During this 10-year process, had you considered hiring people, or did you always know you wanted to just be you?
No, I absolutely consider hiring people. I've considered hiring people through the whole process. But one of the things that kind of scared me was, um, again, when you're in law school, you learn law, you don't learn business, right? And so I was always concerned about the process of, hiring somebody and then, if the economy crashes and things don't go well and you have to lay somebody off, right? I remember in 2020, I was in the same position. I was ready to, bring on an associate, bring on a paralegal, and then we know what happened in 2020. So I'm kind of back in that boat again where I'm looking to bring on either a paralegal or an associate because there's a need for it. The practice is growing and I would love to have somebody on board. So, but it's the right fit to find that. So the goal is to grow the firm. Is just, how do we do it? So,
Yeah, yeah, and that's important, right? It's you've been doing this for 10 years. You clearly know how to make money. You clearly know how to get clients. You clearly know how to keep them happy. But even then, as a business owner, we're always learning.
100%
We're
all the
always
time.
learning, and I think that's nobody knows. There is no playbook, is what I'm trying to tell people, right? And it's okay to learn, and it's okay to make mistakes. And so, with that, that leads me to my next question. In 10 years, what would you say was your biggest mistake as a business owner?
Um, Learning to say, you have to learn to say no, right? And let me kind of elaborate that. You don't have to take every client that comes to you. You don't have to. Some of them you'll be emotionally vested in. Some of them, you'll want to do it as a favor to somebody else. But I remember, one of the worst clients I ever had was one of my earliest clients I ever had, and I was taking that client because I was desperate. Right? I was like, oh my gosh, I need a client. But I remember everything in my body told me, don't take that client. People around me were like, don't take that client. But I took that client, and it was a very, very good learning experience. Right? It was a very good learning experience. But I would want somebody to learn that by just hearing me out and saying, hey, look, when you're, the hair on the back of your neck standing up and saying, don't take this client, perhaps you shouldn't take that client. I learned from it, but I want somebody else to just use my words and learn from that now and not have to go through that
Yeah, of
again.
course.
Just learn to say
What
no.
was so bad about it?
It was just, it was a client that, you could have put him in the best situation and it wouldn't be good enough. Right.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it was a good learning experience overall, and I'm
yeah,
happy I went through it. But I learned from that experience very early on to say no. So now when I get some
yeah,
clients, they could be high value clients, they could be high dollar amount clients, they can pay. But if I just don't feel good about that situation or that case or whatever else, I'll say no. I'll say, look, I'm not the best person for this. Let me find you somebody else, right? Or let me refer you to the
yeah,
lawyer referral service. You know, there's other people out there that'll be willing to take this case. Unfortunately, I'm not the right person for it. And a lot of times, the client appreciate that,
yeah.
and it's good for my sanity as well.
And it's really hard in the early days because you put in all this effort in generating this business, in building relationships, and you're starting to see the fruits of the labor, and you see this as one of those potential fruits of that labor. And it turns out it's rotten,
Right,
right? To
right,
keep the analogy going. But in the beginning, it's hard because you're like, well, look, I mean, bills are coming. The bills don't stop. The rent doesn't stop. Electricity doesn't stop. Buying stuff for whatever doesn't stop. And so, I think in the beginning, we're all willing to deal with a little bit more of a tougher client than we'd be willing to deal with today.
right. I agree because look, at that point, you don't really have much of a choice, right? It, my son was born in 2014, so it was like my second year of my practice. And remember, at that point, practice is growing, but you now have another reason to kind of do what you have to do, and so, but again, at that point, your goal changes. Like, okay, I want to be, the perfect dad, or, I want to be the perfect husband, the perfect father, and so you still at that point need to kind of do a check and say, okay, do I need this client? Is this client going to be the right client for my sanity, for my emotional state? Is this client going to, mess up my mind when I come home, and want to play with my kids? You have to ask that question. And I ask that question every single time I get a client, even till today, right? Even till today, I have no problem saying no to clients if I know that when I come home, I'm going to be in a better mental state and better emotional state for my family.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super important. I mean, it's really interesting you say, because you started your practice end of 2012, really started 2013. Your first full year, January to December, you make $23,000. For January, or not January, but in 2014, your son is born.
September
And
2014, yeah.
so that probably, and obviously your wife was pregnant for 9 months before, so you knew this was coming. This wasn't obviously a surprise. And you start seeing those numbers and you start thinking to yourself, how do I get this going? Because 23,000 ain't going to cut it.
No, and obviously 2000, like I said, all those relationships that I built in 2013 kind of started panning out in 2014. So I tell
Right.
people in 2014, I more than doubled what I did in 2015, right? So I would say 2014.
Or in 13, yeah.
Yeah. So in 2014, I was probably around, the lower 50, right? Which still
Right.
isn't good enough for, living in San Diego and being a lawyer.
Yeah.
But in 2016, I probably doubled that again, right? So
Yeah.
it just, 2015 probably doubled that again, and it's just gotten better ever since
Keep
then.
going from there. Yeah.
Right. So, but again, the key element is you don't stop establishing and building those relationships, right? And you don't stop networking. You don't stop meeting people. You don't stop, kissing babies and shaking hands. You don't stop doing that. You kind of have to keep doing that if you want to be a business owner, right?
Yeah.
You got to keep establishing those relationships regardless, how long you've been in practice.
Right. And, I've had people ask me this, hey, look, I've been in this for, 10 years, 15 years, or, I'm thinking about starting my own practice. And, I understand I got to go out and generate business. But after a certain point, after 10 years, maybe I've got my establishment and then I don't have to do that anymore. And to that, you say, no, you're wrong.
I would say so. I mean, look, the goal is to build a team of people that will be part of that networking, right? They'll join BNI groups, they'll join the tips, they'll join other networking groups, and they'll be able to build business. That's the goal, right? But you are still going to be the face of your company. You are still the face of it, right? And that's you are what got the company started. And a lot of times, my name is on the firm, right? So I want to be the face of the firm. I want to be the person that people can rely on, that they can connect with at that point. So you are always going to be the number one, business generator of your practice.
Yeah. And you have to be. And
you have to be, right? Like,
And
you have to.
sorry, I was just going to ask you, you and I have had this conversation a lot throughout the years, because I know for you, you've made conscious decisions that were for less work, for less money, because it was going to be more time with the family and the kids. And I want to talk about that because we've had so many guests on the podcast that talk about building a 50, 60 person practice and how much time and effort they put into that. And I know how different it was for you. And I think that's really important. So tell me a little bit about your mindset. I know now you have 2 kids, right? And I see a lot of family trips and things like that. So tell me a little bit about that.
That was the goal. My goal was I want to be available for my son's soccer games, his baseball practices. I want to be available for my daughter's events. I want to take vacations with my family. That's been my goal, right? I'm not working so that I can create this massive practice and have missed out on the first, 10, 15, 20 years of my kid's life. That's not what I wanted. I wanted to be available for that. I coached my son's baseball team last year. I take him to his baseball practices, twice a week. I'm able to go to his soccer practice. I'm able to, watch my daughter learn to dance. Those are the things that I care most about. So it was a conscious choice to say, look, I can either use my skills now that I have 10 years into practice and go work for a bigger firm and, see how much they pay. I doubt they'll be able to match what I make now. Or I can go work for a mid-sized firm, or I can team up with somebody else and build a practice, but not have the quality of life that I do right now. But what I enjoyed was, the people that I grew up around in law school, like yourself, and even watching Arthur and other people, that they have very similar goals. They want to build a thriving practice, but they also understand that there's a bigger picture out there, and we don't want to give up on our families. We want to kind of grow with the family. And I knew what my goal was, and I've kind of stuck to that overall. And the more power to people that have a different mindset. I'm all for that. Nothing wrong with that. My mindset was always based around family, always.
Yeah, and I think that's beautiful, and I love that because there's so many different ways to lead your life and control your life, and especially when you're deciding to run your own practice. Despite, hey, you started the practice, you come from sales, you know how to hustle, you know how to generate business, and you did all that, but you did all that with a purpose. You knew there was like a, hey, look, if I get too busy or I get too big and I find myself missing stuff, I'm going to start referring clients out because it's not just
Right.
about
100%.
generating more money at the end of the year.
Look, you have to, anything you do, you have to find your why, right? You have to identify what your why is. I remember when I was in strength and conditioning and a trainer, I used to ask people, why are you doing what you're doing? You want to lose weight, you want to gain weight, you want to get healthy. Why? What is the reason behind that? Unless you can identify the why, you're never going to have a true goal to move forward to, right? So I had to first identify my why, and my why is always going to be my wife, my two kids. That's just simple as that. And I want to be able to take trips. I want to go to, Hawaii. We love going to Hawaii. We go every year, and I want to do trips. I want to hang out with my family. I want to see my kids play. And those are important to me, right? I don't want to be at work till 10 o'clock at night, right? Obviously, sometimes that necessitates that when if you're prepping for a trial or something else. I get that. But, the lifestyle that I've created for myself is one that allows me to be present for my children. And I enjoy that.
Yeah. Yeah. And in building that, in balancing those two, which is very difficult because as lawyers, we're known to, work hard and really go kill for it. I know you work hard. I'm not trying to say you don't, but balancing those two, what do you think is the hardest thing, or where the frustrations have been for you in trying to balance those two?
There hasn't been any, because I've kind of turned off the dialogue from the outside, right? Look, law is it's a tough profession, right? We've had a friend that we lost last year to suicide, right?
Yeah.
Earlier this year. So we know what happens. Law is a very, very tough profession, and it can be mentally and emotionally draining on a lot of people. So you have to figure out what you want out of it. And a lot of times, if you're trying to live up to the standards and expectations of others, you're never going to do that, right? And I've been very good about kind of shutting out the dialogue from the outside and people's expectations of what lawyers need to be and should be. And, you got to work 80 hours a week if you're working at a big firm. Well, screw you. I'm not going to work at a big firm then, right? I like the life that I have. I make damn good money. Knock on wood on that. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy the time I can spend with my family. And that to me is more valuable than anything else, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The best analogy I heard for something like that, and the way I kind of operate on Esquire Tech and different places is we play tennis, not golf. Or excuse me, we play golf, not tennis, right? And what I mean by that is in tennis, in order to win, you have to beat the other person. You're competing against somebody else, and
Right.
what they do affects you.
Right.
In golf, it's all just about what you do. I'm just trying to get the best score I can get, regardless of what anybody else is doing. Like, yes, there's other people playing, but it's all on me, and it's just I'm trying to hit a certain score. I'm not trying to hurt anybody or bring them down, and what they do doesn't necessarily affect how I operate my game.
That's a very good point, because you are terrible at golf.
I am terrible at both golf and tennis, but I'm good at the analogy though. I got the analogy part down.
That's a very good analogy, and I agree with that. I'm not good at golf either. I just enjoy going out there and playing it. But you're right. You're kind of kind of every time you go out there, it's the score. You're trying to beat your score, your best, or whatever you're trying to do at that point. But that would be my thing. I'll tell these young lawyers coming out, turn off the noise from outside. Figure out what is your why. Figure out where you want to be 5, 10, 15 years from now, and find a way to get there without losing yourself mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. That's the most important thing, right? Because you don't want to be 30 years down there figuring out, okay, now I want to gain all that back, because it's going to be difficult to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that next question, what's your vision for your own firm for the next 10 years? You've talked about maybe hiring somebody, maybe partnering, looking at different options. Where do you see yourself in 10
All those
years?
things are available right now, right? Like, my PI practice is growing slowly. I enjoy, like, you and I talked about this. I really, enjoy the PI part of it. And I think I enjoy the PI part of it a little bit more than I enjoy the business litigation part of it. So kind of figuring out, what's the best option. Do I team up with another attorney, PI lawyer who wants to grow the practice, but I also don't want to give up the other part of my practice that I have as well. That's kind of goes hand in hand, because a lot of those clients that I have from estate planning and business refer me PI clients, right? So those are long term relationships. So it's all open right now, and I'm kind of hoping that this next year will kind of make things a little bit clearer. And I haven't kind of put myself out there saying, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to bring people on board and just build my own practice, or do I want to team up with somebody? It's a lot easier when you teamed up with somebody else, right? Versus trying to do it all by yourself. But it's all available. We'll see.
Yeah, everything has its pros and cons, right?
Right.
And it's all about, like you said, what's the goal 10 years from now? What's the goal 15 years from now? And then what's the clear path of getting there? And I think when we're goal setting, which is super important, saying, hey, 10 years, 15 years, this is what I want. This is the lifestyle I want. This is, the money I kind of want to make and the range. This is kind of what I anticipate for what I want for my family. But then working backwards and then saying, okay, well, what do I got to do? Where should I be next year to be on pace to get there in 10 years? And
Right.
I think it's very easy to say, okay, 10 years, I want to do this, and then not think about it. And then in a year when you're not there, people get disappointed and say, oh, well, I didn't hit my goals. Well, your goal is for 10 years from now. So don't worry about hitting it in a year. But growing slowly, growing at a pace you want, understanding what you said earlier, that time and effort and money investment that happens early doesn't pay off for a few years.
Right. You have to have like actionable goals, right? So if your goal is, hey, look, I want to make, $2 million gross in 5 years, whatever, right? Then and you are at, $1 million right now. Well, you got to get from 1 million to 2 million, and you got, I would say divide that by five and figure out, okay, what's the growth you have to make over the next 2 years? $200,000 per year. Okay. Well, how do you get to that $200,000? Do you add a certain amount of estate planning clients? Do you add a certain amount of business clients? Do you add a certain amount of PI cases? It's, obviously you can get there with one PI case, but at least you have now an actionable goal to figure out, this is the number that I have to increase by every year. What do I need to do to increase the amount of clients? Now, that may not be realistically for you to get there individually. So you may have to say, okay, you know what? I got to bring some people on board to capitalize on my strengths. And that's the other thing. You got to figure out what are truly your strengths, right? We know that when you start your own practice, you are the rainmaker, you're the facilitator, you're the technician. You're wearing all hats, right? But what are you really good at, right? And I've always been good at rainmaking, right? Do I want to give that up to be a technician? Probably not, right? Because I bring in the bread and butter. So does that mean that now I need to hire good technicians? Probably. That I can continue to go and rainmake and bring that on board. And I don't
And
want
by
to.
technician, you mean the person to do the actual legal work,
Yeah,
right?
look, there's some people that would prefer to be in the office, right? Talk to the adjusters, or draft the estate plans, right? Draft the business documents. They would prefer to do that as opposed to go out there and network. And they may be great at that. They may be great at the in-office technical stuff. Don't change that. Let them continue to be great at that, right? Capitalize on that while you capitalize on being what you're good at, which is rainmaking.
Yeah.
Or, if you start building a staff, you might need somebody to facilitate within that, somebody to delegate responsibilities. So you just have to figure out what your strengths are and work with that.
I love that. I love that. That's any part. Okay, let me ask you this question. I always ask everybody this question because I love the variety of answers I've gotten. So, Kris, if you've given a lot of advice to lawyers out there that want to start their own practice, and I know you've mentored a lot of young lawyers, you've had your own mentors, but if you could go back in time 10 years and tell your younger self, Kris, exactly Kris, not just some random young lawyer, you could tell Kris something, what would you tell Kris?
Learn to say no. I tell this to all young lawyers that I meet: learn to say no. I'm glad I learned that early on. So I learned that lesson in my first second year. but learn to say no. You don't, I know you're coming out of law school and you're desperate to take every case that comes on your table, but not every case will be good for your growth and for your business. Because that case that you take on, that your body tells you not to take on, your mind tells you not to take on, may be the case that might ruin law for you, might ruin the idea of having your own practice for you. It almost did it to me. So I just don't learn to say no.
Wow, that's great. Let's end on that. That was fantastic. Kris, thank you so much for being on. Thank you for everybody for listening or watching. We'll see you on the next episode of Bootstrapped Solo. And remember, just because guys like Kris Mukherji make it look easy doesn't mean that it is. And our one ask for all of you that are listening and watching, if you've enjoyed the pod, please share where you share stuff, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, whatever. We can only grow because you guys share, and we appreciate that. Kris, if you don't mind sharing your Instagram or website, where can people find you?
All right. So the website is kmsdlawoffice.com. My first name, Kris Mukherji, sdlawoffice.com. You can find us on Facebook at Law Office of Kris Mukherji. You can find us on Instagram, Law Office of Kris Mukherji, Twitter, Law Office of Kris Mukherji. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day, and we'll see you on the next episode of Bootstrap Solo.
Thanks, Pratik.